Welcome to the Pageturner. Before this episode starts, I want to inform you that topics covered in this episode may be found disturbing or uncomfortable to some listeners. As such, viewer or rather listener discretion is advised. Additionally, if you or a loved one needs help, help is available by dialing 988 for the suicide hotline. You are not alone. Now sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy the episode. Hi guys, I'm back. Welcome back to another episode of the Pageturner. I'm your host Christina, and today we're gonna have more of an author talk today. If you see it on my Instagram post, I post regularly there to promote the episodes that I post on YouTube. So this episode today is going to be about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. I have the book here, and specifically about her life, the inspirations that came into Frankenstein, and all that good stuff. Even the differences between this version, the 1818 version, and the 1831 version, and adaptations and the influence that Frankenstein had on pop culture. I'm actually very excited to do this episode because, like I said earlier, I saw a stage play at this at one of the universities, one of the local universities. It was really good. It really interested me about Mary Shelley's motivations to write the book, in- including the story behind the book, and just the plot in general. I thought it sounded so interesting. It was so different from the pop culture that we all take in. So I was very surprised at how good it was. And so this is definitely a book I should be getting to soon. I don't know because my TBR is ever growing. So yeah. So let's get right into it. So we're going to start off with, most importantly, who was Mary Shelley? So let me get my computer over here. Okay. So, Mary Shelley was an English romantic author best known for Frankenstein, however, she has published other works. She was the daughter to William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft. And Mary Wollstonecraft was actually a very famous women's rights activist during the time, and she wrote this book, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. And it basically advocated for women's rights. And her original last name was Godwin, so she got William's last name when they married. However, she died 11 days after Mary's birth from a perpetual cold. So then Godwin married her stepmother, Mary James Claremont. She later changed her name. And Shelley actually hated her, and Claremont hated her back. And it was not good. So then Shelley became displaced in 1803 in her family. She did not receive a formal education, but grew up in an atmosphere led by thinking and writers who admired her father. And by age 11, she published Monsieur, how do I say that? Sorry, Nong Dong Pao, or the discoveries of John Bull and a trip to Paris through her father's publishing house, which was originally a children's tale. Later, she spent 2 years in Scotland to live with an acquaintance of her father, and there she wrote a little bit more. And when she first met her love, Percy Bysshe Shelley, it took place in either November of 1812 or 1814. This is up for debate with a lot of historians during a visit home. Now, when I was doing research for this episode of the ages that they were at the time, various ages popped up. So the consensus I made was Mary Shelley was 14 through 16 at this time. Percy was 19 to 21 at this time. So that's that. Percy was also married to someone else when he met Shelley. He was also kind of rebellious in his schools, and they essentially eloped in France in July of 1814, and where they had a daughter, Clara, but she died within 2 days of birth in February of 1815, and this caused a rift with Shelley's father, and they distanced for 2 years. It's also highly debated if Shelley lost her, you know what, to Percy on her mother's grave. This is highly debated. People say yes, or other people say no online. But what I have searched up and what I have concluded is they had frequent interactions in St. Pancras' old graveyard. So that's that. Do with it what you will, okay? I'm not gonna give my opinion and say yes, this happened, or no, this This did not happen, but they did have frequent interactions in St. Pancras Old Graveyard. And here are some more fun facts about her. She was actually fascinated about science, and particularly the works of scientists like Luigi Galvani and Alessandro Volta. Also, she edited and published Percy's work after his death, and she also kept Percy's heart in her desk wrapped in his poetry after his death. And additionally, the Godwin family took an Aaron Burr, which I was very surprised about, for a while after he killed Hamilton. And they actually formed a really close relationship together, which I thought was really interesting while doing research for this episode. I would have never imagined Mary Shelley and Aaron Burr being connected in some way, but yeah, this was really interesting to research. Okay, so now we're going to get into the motivations of why Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. So, in May of 1816, her, Percy, and Claire went to Lake Geneva, Switzerland to meet with poet Lord Byron. So, Lord Byron is actually a British romantic poet and satirist, and his poems mainly had a gloomy tone. And he was a previous member of the UK House of Lords. And it was an unusually rainy sunny, which many people call the haunted summer. Also, another guest, the fifth guest, John Polidori, was a doctor and author of The Vampire of 1819, and he was also there. And when they were there, Byron challenged his guests to a ghostwriting story contest. And Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein specifically for that contest. And she was inspired by the 1812 French translation of a German ghost story collection, Phantasmagoria, which was a nightmarish experience that, end quote, conjured the students horrified by his vivification of assembled human body parts, and by another dream where she tried to conjure her dead daughter, Clara, if you remember, back to life. Also there, Percy wrote the poem Mont Blanc and Hymn to Intellectual Beauty. Shelley and Percy then returned to England in September of 1816 and got married on December 30th, 1816. She then continued to work on the novel, adding material after visiting the Swiss Alps in July of 1816. She also gave birth to another daughter, Clara Everina, not the same as Clara, okay, in September of 1817, but she died of dysentery soon after. So Mary Shelley was essentially ravaged by death, and this could have caused like her motivations in writing the novel and just putting all of her craft into this. It's very depressing, but it's very cool to see how it plays out in the novel and the stage play and like any adaptation. I think it's really cool of how that plays out and how it shines. So, if you didn't know what Frankenstein was or the plot, I have a quick overview here. So, there's essentially this scientist named Victor Frankenstein, and he artificially creates a human being that, when he comes to life, brings tragedy and chaos to his life. The book is also called The Modern Prometheus, and if you aren't familiar with like Greek mythology, Prometheus is the tale of this guy who essentially wants to give fire to the humans, but essentially the gods punish him for it by tying him to a boulder and a vulture pecking out his liver every single day. So yeah, um, if you take like the Penguin Classics, there's a bunch of other reading material that you can get into, and I would highly recommend you read like the introduction and all that to get a better scope of Mary Shelley's life. Would definitely recommend it. Sometimes there's also like family trees and all of that. So I think if you want to read this, read the stuff first that I'm mentioning in order to get a better grasp of who the author was and what their motivations were. Now we're going to get into the good stuff. So, right here, I have the 1818 version of Frankenstein, but there was also an 1831 edition of Frankenstein, and we're going to talk about the differences between them. So, the 1818 version was first published in January, and at the time, only 500 copies were anonymously printed. She did not immediately claim authorship due to the content involved in the novel, but the book exploded in popularity soon after. The original edition included a preface written by Percy and a dedication to her father. This led many people to believe that one of these men was actually the author and not Mary Shelley. But Mary Shelley was indeed the author. Trust. However, Percy did alter word choice, swapped language to be more accessible, but it was definitely certain, like I said, that she was the original author. And then in 1831, the third edition published, which included extensive edits and an introduction describing her inspirations. And I have a quote here with more inspiration from Britannica. Other possible connections between Mary Shelley's life and her novel include a trip she and her husband-to-be took along the Rhine in 1814, where she may have spied Frankenstein Castle. There, during the 18th century, theologian and alchemist Johann Conrad Dippel was rumored to have been studying artificial life, even supposedly engaging in grave robbing as part of his research. And the 1831 edition is actually more popular as it's more drawn upon for adaptations. It's a more fatalist version, as fatalist meaning that all events were believed to be predestined and out of human control. And these next few things I'm going to say are quotes from NPR, an online magazine. Okay, so, and I quote, "For that edition, what the author revealed, and the story still shocking, there was likely some pressure on Shelley to create a slightly more pious impression. But she had lost children, siblings, and her husband to the interim, and in some ways the later edition reflects a life defined by grief. She notes that the book echoes many a walk, many a drive, and many a conversation when I was not alone. My companion was one who, in this world, I should never see more." But the 1818 version, the one I have here, has fewer drastic differences than the 1831 version, and I quote again from NPR. But in the 1818 text, the structure is a means to return again and again to the idea of choice. Frankenstein is not yet a tragic figure borne along on the winds of fate. He is a man whose ambition exceeds his conscience, and who turns down several chances to take responsibility or make amends. Here, Frankenstein isn't a tragic hero, but a flawed protagonist. The novel is sympathetic to his terror, perhaps, but not to his decisions. And the 1818 version is actually more reflective of the nervousness and the thrill of this newfound science in this new era, especially in society, and it's less concerned with divine plans. So the last section we're going to talk about is modern impact and adaptations that came from Frankenstein. Overall, we can all agree that Frankenstein had a huge impact on pop culture and all these adaptations. In fact, the creature has become one of the most recognizable characters in pop culture, and as of 2017, characters from the book have appeared in 177 TV and film adaptations and 58 plays listed in a UK theater database, which is crazy. As of now, the name Frankenstein now most likely refers to the creation than the scientist himself, and currently the creature is often depicted as a green-skinned brute with bolts on the neck, when in the actual book, the creature is more of like a patchwork of skin and human body parts, which I thought was cool when I first saw the stage play and the creature comes out. I'm like, whoa, this is completely different. But I thought it was really cool just to see the difference and how that evolved over time. So Frankenstein actually first made the jump in cinema in a 1910 silent film, but it was not until the appearance of James Whale's adaptation in 1931 that it began to spread in Anglo-American culture. Film adaptations also include Britton Hammer's film series in 1957, as well as Meet Frankenstein in 1948, Young Frankenstein in 1974, Igor in 2008, Frankenweenie in 2012, and Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, which was released last year. However, I've been getting mixed reviews about this because it's more of a romance base than the actual plot of the book. So I'm going to maybe watch it. I don't know, because fun fact, I don't watch TV or movies a lot. But this does seem really interesting, and I know Guillermo del Toro is a great director, so I want to see how different it is from the book. Speaking of books featuring references to Frankenstein include Dr. Frankenstein's Daughter in 2013, Man-Made Boy also published in 2013, This Dark Endeavor published in 2011, The Memoirs of Elizabeth Frankenstein in 1995, Unnatural Creatures, a novel of the Frankenstein woman in 2002, and The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein in 2018. And that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know this is a shorter episode, but I'd like to give you a rundown on one of the most influential voices in our horror and sci-fi genre. This was actually denoted to be one of the first sci-fi novels published ever, and that is such a great accomplishment, especially for women. To write something like this and of this depth was absolutely crazy, and I have mad respect. This is like a very deep book. I've never read this, just so you know. But the stage play depicting her life and how strong of a woman she was as an author and a person was great. Through all the loss and all the stuff she had to go through her life, to come up with this book that pioneered through centuries beyond her time is such a huge thing. So I admire her very much. And that's really it. So our next episode is going to be more of a lighthearted one to balance us out. Is going to be new horror books published in 2026 that you guys can look forward to and add to your TBRs. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you when we do horror book recs. Bye, guys.